Cross live to the Andrews base, where U.S. President Joe Biden is meeting the freed American journalist Evan Gershkovich. These are the live visuals of the Wall Street journalist Evan Gershkovich there meeting the U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris and U.S. President Joe Biden. This is the biggest swap of its kind after the Cold War era, and we are getting you live visuals from the Andrews base, where U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris are meeting freed Americans who have arrived at the joint base Andrews. And that is American journalist Evan Gershkovich hugging U.S. President Joe Biden, perhaps thanking him for the historic prisoner swap deal. A total of 26 high-profile international prisoners were swapped between the West and Russia. That's the U.S. reporter Evan Gershkovich meeting his family. U.S. President Joe Biden is also meeting the American journalist family at the Andrews base. This was the biggest prisoner swap since the Cold War era, where a total of 26 high-profile international prisoners were exchanged between the West and Russia. Biden has also called this historic prisoner exchange as a feat of diplomacy. And these are the live visuals from Joint Base Andrews in the United States of America, where the freed Americans have just landed in the U.S. and they are meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. A total of 26 prisoners were released in the historic prisoner swap, and the detained Americans who have now been freed are meeting their family members and are extremely elated. We can see gushing emotions there at the Joint Base Andrews. It's indeed an historic moment as families meet the released Americans at the Joint Base Andrews. A total of 3 of the released Americans, including Russian U.S. journalist also Kurmasheva, they have landed in the U.S. This is a historic prisoner swap deal. We can see family members meeting the detained Americans who have now been freed. A total of 26 high-profile international prisoners were freed. 3 Americans are back on U.S. soil following their release from Russian detention in a historic prisoner exchange with Moscow. Former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, and Russian-American journalist also Kurmasheva. They have all right now landed in Joint Base Andrews, from where we are getting the live visuals. And U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, they're all meeting with the detained, now freed Americans who have landed on the U.S. soil. Well, a total of 26 high-profile international prisoners. And for more on this, our correspondent Susan Tehrani is joining us on the phone line. Susan, talk to us about the significance of this historic prisoner swap deal. We are getting live visuals from the Joint Base Andrews, where 3 Americans who have now been freed have arrived in the Joint Base Andrews.
Yes, and as we can see, Vice President Kamala Harris and President Biden are there to greet them one by one. We just saw Paul Whelan, and now we're seeing the individual that was with Paul Whelan, talking to the president, not only was this a very complex situation and prisoner swap, as you mentioned, involving 24 people being held in at least 6 countries, but President Biden hoped that this would be a legacy-defining moment for him as well. He made very clear that...
The toughest call on this one for other countries is I asked them to do some things that were against their immediate self-interest, and really very difficult for them to do, particularly Germany and Slovenia. Slovenia came in at the last minute, and I tell you what, the chancellor was incredible. He was incredible.
So what's your message to other countries that may think that taking Americans into their custody, unlawfully detaining them, would be a good way to get something that they want from us?
Hey, look, that's been the case for all of history. My job is to make sure, number one, they don't get them. And if they do, we get them back. I don't buy this idea that you're going to let these people rot in jail because other people may be captured. We will set out all the notifications to all the other countries, all our citizens, what countries not to go to, what to do, what not to do, and they got to pay attention. I got more work to do. So.
This is an extraordinary day, and I'm very thankful for our president and what he has done over his entire career, but in particular as it relates to these families and these individuals, what he has been able to do to bring the allies together on many issues, but in particular this one. This is just an extraordinary testament to the importance of having a president who understands the power of diplomacy and understands the strength that rests in understanding the significance of diplomacy and strengthening alliances. This is an incredible day. You can see it in the families, in their eyes, and in their cries.
A while ago. We got to make sure, wanted to make sure everything was in place. And Slovenia made the right move at the right time. So anyway, look, it's time to trust. I mean it. I know everybody thinks I talk about the notion of relationships with foreign policy with other countries. Much of it, and you've heard me kid with Barack, all politics is personal. It matters. Other leaders trust you, you trust them, you get things done. And that's how this got done. A lot of help. Anyway, thank you.
How worried are you?
I'm very concerned about it. I had a very direct meeting with the Prime Minister today, and very direct. We have the basis for a ceasefire. He should move on it, and they should move on it now.
Is the chance for a ceasefire ruined after the assassination of Haniyeh?
It's not helped. That's all I'm going to say right now. Thank you.
Was the U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris talking about the historic swap deal. Yes, Susan, you were talking about the significance of this historic prisoner swap. We are still getting live visuals of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, and Russian U.S. journalist also Kormasheva, who have landed in the U.S.
Right, and there was a green card holder, of course, that it was a Russia Putin critic who opted to go to Germany instead. Listen, this is very important. It's significant. It not only involves 24 prisoners in at least 6 countries. It was negotiated over several months and is considered the largest and most complex East-West prisoner swap since the Cold War. Now, another important aspect of it, at least for the Biden administration, is President Biden hopes to see this as a legacy-defining moment at the end of his presidency. So 100 days to go until the election. The White House was making very clear that Kamala Harris, the vice president, was also involved in these negotiations, and she played an important role. And it was interesting to hear from Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, who some believe was a jab at Harris, who said that if it wasn't for President Biden, if he wasn't president himself, then this swap would not happen because of his relationship and alliances with European leaders, notably Germany. So take that at face value of what you will, but it's a day and night of jubilation here in the United States. But tomorrow, expect the critics to come out and say that, okay, what kind of message does this send America's adversaries and countries that it considers hostile, where, swaps like these happen? On the one hand, for example, Russia got a convicted murderer. It got other individuals that are high profile and were accused and convicted of larger crimes. And then, the United States gets back its journalists, so to say. So that criticism is coming of how to deal with hostage negotiations with what U.S. considers rogue governments and what the tightrope and fine line is. But for now, at least,
Susan.
This is a really jubilant moment and, of course, a legacy-defining moment for President.
Absolutely, Susan. Historic prisoner swap deal indeed.